today. We're together and now we're here to stay. United, we will be the change.
Hello and welcome to Above and Beyond, bridging the gap between accessibility and inclusion. I'm your host, Celeste Licorice. And on today's show, we are honored to have Sarah Jama with us. I'm going to read you a little bit of her bio. It's too long to do the whole thing, but I'm going to try. So Sarah is a community organizer from Hamilton. She currently works at the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion as program coordinator. And in her spare time, she acts as a consultant and is currently working with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board to create anti-racism training and peer support-based curriculum for students at the school board. Sarah is a recipient of the John C. Holland Evelyn Myrie Political Action Award and is serving a 2-year term as council member on the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council. She's also been appointed to serve on an anti-Black racism subcommittee and was one of 100 youth selected to weigh in on the Federal Accessibility Act at the National Youth Forum on Accessibility. And that's just a tiny bit of what this woman does. Sarah, thank you for joining us today. We're so glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I wanted to start off by hearing sort of your life story. Now, were you born in Hamilton? Did you come to Hamilton? How?
I was born in Toronto.
Okay.
I grew up with my mom and my siblings, a single-parent household. Yeah. I grew up in community housing in Toronto. We hustled a lot growing up, and my mom was very supportive. We actually moved to Hamilton when I started university at McMaster.
So your whole family moved with you?
Well, my mom actually enrolled in university with me because
sweet.
I'm the youngest, and she always wanted to go to school, but she was taking care of us, right?
Oh
so
my gosh.
I was like, Mom, you got to do it now. Like, now's your chance.
Yeah.
So we came to school together.
So you both enrolled, you both got accepted,
Yeah.
you both went to university together.
And we took electives together. It was a lot of fun.
Wow, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So you went to McMaster, you graduated from McMaster. Now, I think I first met you at McMaster, and you were doing some political activism things there. So tell us a little bit about your journey that way.
Okay, so I can tell you a little bit about how I started to get political or organized.
Yeah, because I think of you as an activist and organizer. So tell us about
Yeah, so I'll take it a little bit back to grade 12. When I was in grade 12, I met a kid named George who was in a wheelchair. And up until that point, I internalized a lot of the barriers that I faced.
Now, were you in a wheelchair at the time?
I was in my walker or wheelchair, so I
Okay.
used both
Yeah.
consistently. And at the time, he told me he had wanted to apply to Etobicoke School of the Arts, but he didn't apply because they didn't have an elevator. And at that time, I was like, what do you mean there's a structural system that is telling you you can't achieve your dream of being an actor? And for some reason, this was a thing that made me so offended, even though throughout my life, I'd faced so much barriers in the medical system, education system, teachers telling me I would never make it to post-secondary. But that was the thing that woke me up. It's like
It was
there
somebody
a
outside of
system,
you. And you
exactly,
realized,
telling this kid in grade 9 that he wouldn't be able to achieve his dream and be an actor. So I figured out that there was a committee called the Special Education Advisory Committee.
At your school?
At the Toronto District School Board.
Okay.
And so I got on a bus to try to delegate at like 7 p.m. at night for the first time downtown by myself. I show up to the meeting, and the chair of the committee laughs in my face and says, "Who do you think you are to be able to come here and try to speak on this issue? You don't have any speaking rights. Like, this student didn't even apply to the school. Who are you to tell us that we need to do this thing? And where did you come from?" And he thought it was amusing. So for me, that was the first time that I took a step back and I could see around this table a group of people in a position of power that could literally decide who had the right to access space and who didn't, right? It was like the personification of power right in front of me. So at that point, I told myself, okay, if this ever happens again, I'm going to try to figure out a way to address it.
And you were like, you were 17?
I was 17.
Yeah.
So I graduated, I went to McMaster University. It was one of the most accessible campuses that I could find, really, compared to the other campuses. And I liked Hamilton because of the accessible transit and the high population of people with disabilities in the city.
I understand that we have, one of the highest rates or highest populations of people with different abilities in the province.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a large number, so we felt comfortable coming here, and I went to McMaster University and I started to learn about barriers there. My math class wasn't accessible and I needed it.
So what did you do about it? We've got about 2 minutes left in the segment.
So basically I long story short, I ran for student council on the platform of accessibility, wrote the student union's first ever accessibility policy, created a service called MACCess for students with disabilities, run by students with disabilities.
Right.
And pushed for the creation of that through the student union.
Now, how did you garner support? Because it's one thing to have an idea, to have a passion, but how did you gather people around you and keep the energy going?
You build coalitions. So I know that as a Black woman with a disability who has faced a lot of different kinds of barriers, that my issue is not the only issue out there. So I would sit down with as many student clubs as possible and get to know what other issues existed on campus, because I know that campus is a microcosm of society, and that we need to learn to work in coalitions and build solidarity between each other and Indigenous rights and Palestinian rights, and work together to push toward a common goal.
Right.
And so that's what I did, and that's how I was able to build support around many different kinds of issues around the environment on campus, in terms of like budget expenditures that were wrong from the administration, pushing for the precarious workers' rights on our campus, and all of these.
So, is there anything you didn't take on? I mean, it sounds like you were.
I didn't take on class.
But you graduated.
Yeah, I did.
So, what's your degree in?
I ended up with a degree in social sciences.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't. I didn't end up specifying through a thesis because I was so busy, but. It is what it is.
Yeah. So when you left university, like, so you graduated and you did a lot on campus, a lot to advance, making things accessible, raising awareness, then what did you move on to?
When I graduated?
Yeah.
I'm trying to recall. While I was on campus, I was doing workarounds like anti-Black racism. And then I was also working for Councillor Matthew Green as a city councillor.
What was that experience like for you?
It was interesting. As somebody who was like practicing working outside of the systems and perfecting that sort of idea of change making, I got a real good understanding of how the system works and the language that's required to push things along on the inside of the system as well as outside.
So you saw yourself as working outside the system when you were doing stuff at McMaster, but then by working in city council, it gave you a view from the inside.
Yeah, it gave me a real understanding of the language and how language is very powerful to bureaucracy, and how with one tiny stroke of a pen, an entire change can be made that can affect someone's life, you know? And I got a real understanding of what issues people were calling on the phones. So it was a different experience, and I think my activism and my organizing is a lot stronger because of it.
Because now you have it from the outside and from the inside.
Yep.
All right, well, we're going to take a break. We'll be back after these messages with more Sarah Jama.
Friday night, December the 28th, the Hamilton Bulldogs return from Christmas break on the OHL tonight. They head to the Sleeman Center in Guelph for the first of a home-and-home with the rising Guelph Storm. Nate Schnarr, fresh off signing his first NHL contract, will lead the Storm into action as they look to show that the last few years are behind them and they are a serious championship contender. You can catch all the action live in HD right here on Cable 14 beginning at 7:30.
You consider yourself a good citizen, a good employee, and courteous person. But when you get behind the wheel, you become a maniac, hogging the road, saying and doing things you would never do without the protection of your vehicle. You tell yourself you're a good driver. You just like to go fast.
In 2017, there were 1,681 collisions that involved injuries and 16 fatalities in Hamilton. Speed kills. Slow down. Driving is a privilege, not a right.
A message from the City of Hamilton.
And welcome back to Above and Beyond, where we're talking to Sarah Jama, community activist and organizer extraordinaire. So you were talking a little bit before the break about your history with school and high school and university and how you became an activist and organizer and the things that have inspired you. We want to move on now to a fairly new initiative that you're co-founder of. So do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I'm one of the co-founders of an organization called the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, which is funded through something called the Youth Opportunities Fund.
Right.
And the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion is our organizational mentor. And basically, my friends and I, who are all people of color with disabilities, and we're all women, started to realize that the conversation around accessibility was really focused on transactional economic benefits to society. So every time somebody talks about accessibility normally, when it's coming from people without disabilities, it's usually centered around and stops at access to stores and focuses on consumption. But we weren't talking about things like how for the longest time, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act didn't have an education standard. Or for the longest time, how 83% of women with disabilities are sexually assaulted at least once in Canada.
Wow.
Or how the rates of violence are 1 in 2 for people with disabilities, right? Especially if you have an invisible or mental health concern.
Right.
And so us as people of color, us as women on the margins of society, we wanted to come together to create an organization where we weren't just focusing on economic purchasing power
Right.
or just the need for jobs. We wanted to talk about issues around how do we build personal and political capacity to push for change
Right.
as people with disabilities? How do we push for self-determination? Right? How do we push to create a world where people with disabilities are free to be, regardless of whether or not you can work, regardless of whether or not you have, a certain economic standing, right?
Right.
How do we create a world where people with disabilities are free from constraints and can live, right? And make
Yeah.
choices that affect them.
Right. So that self-determination, and not just how can I get into this particular store. Of course,
Yeah.
that it is important to be able to access physical spaces.
It is.
But you want to elevate the conversation, it sounds like, to a different level.
We want to move away from just talking about access and more toward justice, right? So people having the individual right to live, regardless of whether or not you have money to spend, right?
Yeah.
We also want to talk about unpacking this idea of independence. So the independence movement was a very popular movement when disability activism was picking up, especially in the States. And
So what do you mean when you say independence movement?
so in Berkeley, there were organizers and activists that were pushing for the creation of what we now call the independent living movement, where people were saying that we should have the right as people to live as independently as possible.
Okay.
And to be supported in that way. It's important to think of independence as important, but as there are issues with this social construct of independence, we have to also talk about not everybody can be independent.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Where do the people in our society fall when you can't actually fall into this line of surviving on your own, right?
Right.
And if you think of something as simple as like the food that we eat, none of us are independent in society. We all are interconnected together.
Yeah.
All of us have to go to a grocery store.
Right.
And where is that food coming from?
Yeah.
So unpacking this idea of certain people who are more palatable, right?
Yeah.
Having space and focusing on those who are most marginalized. So I got asked to speak a lot.
Yeah.
But what about people who don't communicate as easily, don't have my privilege of being able to speak, right?
Right.
What are we doing to include those people on the margins, or people with disabilities who are trans or who are imprisoned,
Right.
right? Or who
So
are
the purpose of the network then is to open
Yeah.
up the margins to the most marginalized. So no.
exactly.
Okay.
And using a framework of justice as opposed to just a framework of access, knowing that not
Right.
everybody has this concept of access to space.
Right. Or this concept of independence as the end goal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
I can tell you what that will look like
Yes,
in practice.
yes.
Okay, so our youth council is going to be made up of people, predominantly people of color and youth with disabilities.
now youth, does it have like an age range that you're talking about?
We're still debating it.
Okay.
But probably 24 or 25.
Okay.
And we're going to be giving them the tools to decide which campaigns they want to focus on.
Right.
And what small changes that they want to push toward accomplishing in Hamilton, right?
Right.
And giving them the tools and tactics to be able to see an issue and work toward that.
So it's called the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, but it's going to be centered mostly in Hamilton to start, or is it?
We want to perfect our craft here, right?
Okay.
There's such a large proportion of people with disabilities in Hamilton that it doesn't really make sense to go anywhere else. Once we
Yeah.
perfect our craft, we start building relationships with people doing work on the ground, then we'll be able to expand outward. But we really want to make sure that we're serving the most needy, people in need here in our city first before we go outward. I really believe in working where you live. right?
Yeah, making change where you live
Yeah.
first. This is really quite amazing that you've taken your journey from high school just being inspired by one person who didn't have access to the high school that they wanted to go to now actually becoming an agent of change and moving things forward in amazing ways. Where do you see yourself and this movement, say, 5 years from now?
I hope in 5 years from now, the Disability Justice Network has expanded. I don't plan to stay involved in it for 5 years. I think that organizations are the most sustainable when you can perfect how it's running and then make space for other young people and youth to get involved, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of how I see us moving, is in and out consistently. And so I'll still be in Hamilton, I'll still be organizing. It really depends on like the future of like decisions that people in power are making, like what I'll focus on, right? So transit is a big issue in Hamilton. I'm working with the Transit Riders Union on issues. Really, my work just depends on like what needs to be done at the time, and that's how I prioritize.
So you
where I'm gonna
identify the gaps,
focus.
and then you figure out how can you organize and mobilize around
Yeah.
those gaps, which is pretty impressive. Now, I understand that you are just back from a trip.
Oh, true.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about your trip overseas.
I left the country for the first time to go to the continent of Africa for the first time with Empowerment Squared.
Nice.
For the African Youth Governance Conference. So basically, youth in Africa organize a conference that is continental, but this time they wanted to connect with the diaspora.
Yeah.
And so we got to politically weigh in on like this idea of how do we build continental power that is not reliant on just aid from other countries, and more towards self-sustainability. And so we got to actually research policy and recommend changes that have been adopted by the organization. So when they go
what
to
was
lobby,
that experience like for you to be off the continent and in Africa?
it was amazing. I've never been surrounded by that many people who look like me. It was actually like very moving and life-changing.
Isn't that like it's? And I don't know that if everyone can quite understand what that's like. If you grow up, and so you grew up in Toronto, I did as well, and you're not surrounded by people who look like you, to be immersed in culture and people who look like you and who have ideals and goals and things, it is something that some people take for granted, but when you experience it, it is quite empowering.
And it wasn't just like the space; it was like the televisions, the media, the billboards, literally everywhere.
Yeah,
it was moving.
So coming back to Hamilton now, energized by your experience there, has it changed your perception of what we experience as women of color in our communities? It
definitely has shifted my understanding of like the impacts of global capitalism. And ways that I am able to connect my work that I'm doing here back to the continent, as opposed to us feeling like we just have to be stuck doing work here, right? That there are ways for me tangibly to help people my age accomplish their goals from across borders. So it really dismantled this idea of what borders were in my mind.
Yeah, because if you haven't actually traveled across borders, you sort of know of them there, but they're really, I think, in this day and age, quite invisible, or quite, we're mobile, we're connected by the internet, we're connected across so many dimensions.
And it has inspired me to like take my organizing and activism and the relationships that I'm building across the continent and the country.
Awesome. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Well, I'm so glad that we've had this time to share together. I mean, I've seen you speak and been involved with some of your work, but to actually sit down and sort of unpack a little bit about the things that you believe in and what makes you tick has been really great. And I think it's really great for the folks at home to kind of learn a little bit about this powerful organizer, activist that we have right here in our midst doing amazing things. So, are there any final words, like anything that you want people at home to think about when they're moving through their life in space that you think are important?
I want people to know that people with disabilities exist and are present and are capable of being politically engaged and organizing, and that we don't have to think of independence as just fitting into a box, or communication as just fitting into a certain box. And the last thing I'll say is that if you actually really care about accessibility, it's important to make sure you're putting that work into your budgeting and making sure that when you're talking about it, you're working toward making spaces that are tangibly accessible. That's important too.
That is absolutely fantastic. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been, I feel, completely inspired and motivated by you. I mean, I always do when you're around, but to just have this time with you has been fantastic. So thank you. I hope you'll be able to join us again. It's been great to have Sarah spend some time with us. We'll be right back. We're going to switch gears and have a conversation with Anthony Frisina after this break.
Join us on the next City Matters when we'll be learning about the YWCA's plans for affordable housing. We will get an update on the reopening of the Westdale Theatre in 2019, and the AGH joins us to talk about recent funding cuts to Ontario's arts sector, and we also check in on what's happening in Old Town Stony Creek. Catch City Matters at 4, 6, and 10 p.m. right here on Cable 14.
Not everyone gets to go home this holiday season. Your donation to Hamilton Health Sciences Foundation funds vital medical equipment and can make a real difference in a patient's life. Give the greatest gift of all, the gift of health. Double your impact today at giftofhealth.ca.
And we're back with more Above and Beyond. And in this last segment, we're going back to where it all started. And it gives me great pleasure to reintroduce Anthony Frisina, who is the man behind Above and Beyond. Welcome back.
Thanks, Celeste. You know what? Thank you so much for everything. It's been a great experience to be able to work with everybody here at Cable 14, being able to work with yourself. And
yeah,
we've learned so much from a lot of great people here in the community.
It's been a great season. It really has.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? We're only just scratching the surface.
It's true.
And there's so many other great people out there, so many other wonderful organizations that are really doing a lot of great things to promote the importance of accessibility and inclusion. And that's really what Above and Beyond has been about.
Yeah. So take us back to the very beginning, because I mean, this has been sort of a dream for a good 18 months, and we've managed to do the first season together.
Yeah, it all started with a dream for me. I had a couple connections at Mohawk College that, you know, informed me about this opportunity with Cable 14 and the showcase. And yeah, I've just been working diligently with a lot of great people behind the scenes. And we pitched the showcase in November.
Yeah, that was November 2017.
November 2017.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were gracious enough to get a pilot.
Yeah.
And from the pilot, you know, here we are today.
Yeah.
Like, it's just evolved so much, you know. We've done a little bit
So we've covered, like, sports. We did some
recreation.
On recreation.
Social justice. I mean, Sarah was phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah.
We've talked to people at Mohawk College about the accessible media program and accessible learning services. Yeah. I mean, really, that's just scratching the surface, like I said. It's just, there's so many more great organizations out there that promote the importance of accessibility and inclusion.
And this just captures a small amount of the work that you've been doing and continue to do in the community, above and beyond, above and beyond.
Above and beyond, above and beyond. I know, this is just a way of life for me. This is my lifestyle. This is something that I've just grown a passion into when it comes to volunteering at the many organizations that I do, whether it be the Rick Hansen Foundation, the Catholic Youth Organization, even at Mohawk College, I am a part of the Accessibility Awareness of Day events, and committees around the college as well. It's just been a passion, and to be able to bring that passion to this platform, I am eternally grateful for.
Well, you know what? I know you were talking about gratitude, but what I've noticed in working with you and working with guests on the show is that you have this energy that when people come in contact with you and you tell them about your dream and your vision, that it's almost like you just can't help it. You got to be involved. You got to be part of this, right? And so we've met people that you've known your whole life that have been involved in this. Like, it's just been incredible to see how you've taken an idea and been able to plant it with enough people that would say yes.
100%. I mean, it's just about people actually believing in the opportunity that we have. Like, you know, good close friends of mine, people that I work with, you know, people that I've networked with. The community here in Hamilton is amazing. At the end of the day, we're looking at more opportunities to be even more accessible, to be even more inclusive.
Right. And what I'm looking forward to is for people who maybe didn't really know much about what is happening in the world of accessibility and inclusion, that are learning through this platform, through the show, that have maybe learned about, like you talked about the dynamic symbol.
That's
we
right.
talked about that in one of our earlier shows.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to be on City Matters earlier, and we talked about the forward movement and the dynamic symbol of access. And that
now, the
really
dynamic symbol is a more forward-leaning symbol than the traditional static one.
That's correct. Yeah, and it's really more about the person rather than the wheelchair or the mobility aid, so to speak.
Right.
And that's the culture change that I'm hoping with this show helps to lean towards.
Yeah, and you know, and through all of our guests and all of the discussions, there really has been a person-centric, person-first focus to it. So the ability or lack thereof is completely secondary to the people themselves and being able to be their highest expression of themselves no matter what they're doing, whether it's through education at Mohawk, whether it's having the opportunity to go to camp. And I think this show has really shed a light on that in ways that I have not experienced before.
Well, and further to that, Celeste, it's more also about having these conversations that we are, like, with all those great people. You know, I've been fortunate enough to be in the community and speak to from tens of people to thousands of people.
Yeah.
And I simply like to employ a method that I've shortened now to the term MICE.
MICE.
Which is motivation, inspiration, celebration, education.
All right.
And that's, to me, encompasses everything that is here at Above and Beyond.
Motivation,
inspiration,
celebration,
and education.
And education. Yeah.
That's really the core focus of what Above and Beyond has really been about to me.
Yeah.
In terms of getting that assumption-based mindset alleviated and getting people more focused on the person first.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a message that we could all use a bit more of, and I think that this show has gone a long way to help people understand and unpack a little bit.
100%, and you know, I've always said that we're only scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, we're only just beginning to be the change that we need to be here in Hamilton, with the percentage of persons with disabilities in Hamilton is being greater than the provincial national averages.
Yeah.
You know,
so
it makes perfect
we've
sense
only
to be
got
here.
like a minute left. So any final thoughts before we wrap up the season?
Honestly, just a big thank you. Thank you to you, Celeste. Thank you to Gail, to everybody behind the scenes, Minda, for everybody just being a great support here at Cable 14.
Yeah.
This has been an amazing experience. You know, I hope to continue this on in the future, and you know, this is gratitude. I'm eternally grateful for this opportunity, and
as am I. It's just been a glorious ride. And I'm glad to be able to do this with you.
Likewise, thank you so much.
So we're going to wrap up, and as usual, we have a quote of inspiration. And today's quote: "If you believe in a dream and have the courage to try, anything is possible." And that's by Rick Hansen. Thank you so much for joining us on Above and Beyond. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm Celeste Licorice, and we'll see you again.
On your way, walk past strangers' faces every day. Share a smile, it's all you need. You'll be just fine, you'll be alright. Put your hand in mine, and as things change, we're growing strong. We'll rise above it all. Together with friends along the way, united with strength to face the day. We're together.